Hello, fellow UVA parents. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today. This was the only week that I could be away with my entire family at the beach, and so I'm coming to you by video today. I appreciate your understanding. My name is Tim Davis. I'm a professor of leadership and public policy here at the University of Virginia's Batten School. And I thought I'd take a minute up front here just to tell you a little bit about me and my kind of circuitous route to being a leadership professor here at UVA. I actually started my career in corporate life. I was with the Procter & Gamble company for about 7 years as a shampoo marketer. And then a funny thing started happening when I was about 28. This started happening. And when this starts happening and you're a shampoo marketer, if you're smart, you take it as a sign that you maybe should be doing something else with your career. And so I took that sign and, in fact, had become more interested in the people side of the business for some years at that point. So I went back to school, became a psychologist, and had the delight of really studying what helps people to be the best versions of themselves, what helps them to be effective as leaders and good teammates. I went on a pretty clinical track for a while in higher ed. I was the director of the clinical mental health services at the University of Michigan and the director of the UVA Counseling Psych Services Department here at UVA for a few years before really having the delightful opportunity to come on board with the Batten School and really try to scale up our efforts to create resilient college students with classroom exercises and engagement academically. And that's what I have the opportunity to do here, the incredible opportunity to do here at the University of Virginia. So first, let me just say to all of my fellow UVA parents out there, congratulations. It takes a lot to get into the University of Virginia, and our children don't do that just on their own. It takes a lot of support and love from the people around them, from the parents, from the caretakers, from even the siblings to make this happen. And so your whole family system should be feeling good about itself. So congrats to all of you. Here's the thing and the primary message about today's session. For our students to continue to be as successful as they've been up to this point, we're all probably going to have to start to change the way that we're parenting them. Now, as many of you know who have been through this before as a parent of a college student, it takes a really different set of skills to parent a college student than it does to parent a grade school student or a high school student. And just to add a cool little twist, it appears to be getting harder. We're not exactly sure why, but college students today are becoming more stressed and more stretched and more uncomfortable than in years past. I'd like to share a little bit of mental health data that I have from my counseling center days with you just to help make that point. We know that the emotional well-being of college first-year students is at an all-time low in the 39-year history of the research by the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA. We know that college students report in abundance, 63% specifically, report feeling overwhelming degrees of anxiety in just the past 12 months. And we know that roughly 42% of college students report feeling so depressed that they have a hard time functioning during the past 12 months. So it's pretty clear that students are experiencing more stress and less well-being than in the past. And as I said, while we're not exactly sure why precisely, we do think that something might be going on that's important for all of us to pay attention to as parents. And that might be that we're unintentionally contributing to some of those challenges through our own tendency to overparent. So the question is, what can we as parents do in the next 30 to 60 days until your students arrive here on grounds? And what can we do over the 4 years that they're here in order to help develop the strongest, most resilient, and the happiest young adults that we can. So we're going to talk about 4 strategies today that will help us get our heads and our hearts around that very question, starting with strategy number 1, which is to give our students permission to struggle. Now, you see, most families of UVA students are, a relatively high achieving lot. And that's wonderful. But for many students, that high achievement orientation gets internalized as a rule that I'm not allowed to struggle. But what we now know is that college students don't grow and develop themselves without struggle, without experiencing some adversity. See, adversity is a critical component for building emotional resilience. Without struggle, our students can't get stronger, or as one author puts it, they can't become anti-fragile. Nassim Taleb has written about the concept of anti-fragility, and he proposes that just about everything in the world, objects, policies, systems, organisms, can be placed into one of 3 categories. And that first category is things that are fragile. And things that are fragile, they like tranquility. In fact, they crave calm. They don't like stress, and they're harmed by disorder, volatility, uncertainty, pressure. So you think about things like glass vases and plates that break easily, ferns that turn brown when you touch them, and most electronics and machines. That's why when we drop our phones or our laptops, we gasp, right? Because we know that stress for those objects doesn't lead to good things. Now, the second category is things that we consider to be robust. Now, things that are robust, they just don't really have much of a reaction to stress and uncertainty and pressure one way or the other. They are what they are. They take their knocks, and then they continue to be what they were. So you think about things like car tires. It's really hard to do anything to a car tire. It's always going to be, for the most part, a car tire. Dandelions are robust, right? You pull them out of your lawn, they just grow back every time. The root system just goes too deep. It's hard to kill them. Golf balls, when you hit them hard enough, they go oblong for a nanosecond, then they return to that perfect sphere. You think about rocks and steel beams and things that just seem to be impervious to stress. Now, there's a lot to be said for things that are robust. I mean, who wouldn't wear it like a badge of honor to say that I am who I am? I went through an adversity, I took a lot of heat, and now I'm back to being who I was before. That's noble. There's merit in that. But the category that we're really interested in here at UVA and at the Batten School is this third category of things that are what Taleb calls anti-fragile. Things that are anti-fragile grow and get stronger from disorder and stress and volatility. Those conditions actually make them stronger. So things like bacteria, right? The harder you try to harm bacteria, the stronger the surviving bacteria become. It's called antibacterial resistance. Think about books and ideas. If you ever really want to make an idea more popular or stronger, try banning it, right? It only makes the idea more alluring and makes people more curious. The idea usually gets stronger, or the book gets more popular. Think about bones, right? We know what makes bones more dense and stronger is applying pressure and force to them. You think about immune systems, right? When we expose our immune system to trace amounts of often deactivated or dead pathogens, it makes our immune system stronger. But the thing that surprises a lot of people that goes into this third category of anti-fragile is human beings. You see, anti-fragile things don't just want disorder, they need it to thrive, whether they know it or not. In many cases, things that are anti-fragile need stress in order to stay alive. Without stress, anti-fragile things actually suffer. They stagnate, they get weaker. The absence of stressors leads to atrophy. Now, with that, think about how much of our parenting is designed to reduce stress and minimize disorder and pressure for our students. See, when we try so hard to stabilize our students' environments, our intention, of course, is to support them and protect them and to nurture them. But overstabilizing their environment leads to the opposite of those good parenting intentions. And this is what I call the paradox of parenting. When we protect our kids so much, we make them vulnerable. And when we support them too much, we make them weaker. As Taleb says, there's no stability without volatility. Now, this brings up the question, if Taleb's on target, of what's an optimal amount of adversity? How many stressors is it good for us to experience in our lives in order to experience optimal mental health and emotional resilience? Well, there's actually some really cool research on that very question. Siri and her colleagues have found through a longitudinal study of people from about the age of 10 through about the age of 60 that individuals who experience what she and her colleagues call a moderate amount of stress, 6 to 12 negative life events, had the most optimal mental health and resilience outcomes of all the population studied. That means that people who experienced this 6 to 12 number of adversities had better resilience and mental health outcomes than people who experienced fewer than 6 to 12 and people who experienced more than 6 to 12. What it really says is that to be our best, we have to be uncomfortable. Now, I've done a lot of talks and do a lot of talks for public and private sector organizations. And this is one of the messages that I really try to emphasize, that adversity is what forges greatness. Struggle is what produces strength and confidence as leaders. That has been true throughout the ages, whether you are Ernest Shackleton and explored the Antarctic in the early 20th century, or a world-changing leader like Nelson Mandela, or an environmental scientist and author like Rachel Carson. Leaders, like the rest of us, do not fulfill our potential in the absence of struggle. You see, those 6 to 12 adversities in Siri's research, those weren't light adversities. Those weren't like getting your heart broken in the 7th grade. These are pretty serious things, like your parents divorcing or losing a parent or losing a home or addiction problems in the family, things that really pack a heavy punch. So what's the implication of all of this for us as parents? Well, here's the implication. We really want to help our students anticipate that during the next 4 years, they will struggle. They'll sometimes come up short. They may get a C in a course or worse. If they run for office, they'll lose public elections at UVA. And that all of that is okay. In fact, it's actually essential to them getting stronger, more self-sufficient, and building their emotional resilience. Strategy number 2. Carol Dweck, in her amazing book, Mindset, The New Psychology of Success, has studied 2 broad mindsets to which we all subscribe to one degree or another. One is fixed mindset, and a fixed mindset is one in which we grow up believing that IQ and most other capabilities are innate and limited. And it's genetics that really drives the development of our talents and our abilities. Now, on the other side of the spectrum is something called a growth mindset. And a growth mindset is one in which we believe that IQ and most other capabilities are actually malleable. And it's not genetics that drives their development. It's effort and persistence and hard work that drives the development of our talents and our abilities. Now, Carol Dweck in her research has shown that a growth mindset, as opposed to a fixed mindset, is associated with many powerful positive life outcomes, including enhanced resilience, lower levels of anxiety and depression, more life satisfaction, and more confidence. And who wouldn't want all of those things for our students? Now, Dweck's research has also shown that a growth mindset can be taught. Now, if that's true, we should be asking ourselves the question, how do we teach it to our students? Well, there's a couple of ways I want you to think about doing that. One is teaching your students about the power of neuroplasticity. You see, we used to think that the human brain was a finished product, that by the time that people got to be about the age of 20, our brain was mostly done developing. But what we now know is that the brain is continually changing and adapting throughout the lifespan, always making changes on our behalf when we want to learn something new or grow in some way. That's called neuroplasticity. And you see up on that graphic, all those little orange glows represent connections between two brain cells. We think we've got about 100 billion brain cells in our head. And when we try to learn something new or develop a new competence, neurons connect, right? That's kind of how the brain holds new information. But when we're done practicing or thinking about a new idea or a new competence, those connections go away. But here's what happens when we practice them, when we come back to them, when we apply them in new ways and in new situations over and over and over again, right? Those orange connections, they become permanent new fixtures in the human brain. That's called long-term potentiation. And we now know that that is in fact how we get smarter with time throughout the lifespan, and certainly well beyond the age of 20 or 22. Now, there is a catch. To really benefit from neuroplasticity, you have to do things that are difficult for you. You have to be willing to do things that stretch you and take you beyond your current skill sets. What I'm very often saying to students is, you only get smarter by doing things that make you feel dumber. For neuroplasticity to really benefit you, you have to demonstrate an almost preference for complex and difficult work, stuff that feels uncomfortable. You see, the human brain it's kind of like a muscle, and weightlifters know that in order to build muscle tissue, right, you have to lift so much weight that it actually traumatizes the muscle fibers. It actually opens up cuts in the muscle fibers. And the human body's ability to repair those tears in the muscle fibers is the very process that builds muscle tissue, that makes us stronger. To build up more muscle tissue than you've ever had before, you have to lift more weight than you've ever lifted before. You have to make yourself more uncomfortable than you've been before. And it appears the human brain isn't very different in that regard. Now, another way that you can help shift your kids to a growth mindset is to learn how to praise them effectively. So how do we praise effectively? Well, we focus on praising behaviors, not traits. As parents, we want to put our praise effort into things that are more behavioral, right? So we want to praise things like effort and persistence when we see it, and problem-solving strategies and creativity, right? We want to avoid praising things that are more like traits. So we want to avoid praising things like, goodness forbid, giftedness or intelligence or talent or ability. Those things that just sound like you either have them or you don't. Now, to convey the importance of thinking about how we praise our students, I want to tell you about a very scientific study conducted by Carol Dweck and her colleagues out at Stanford University. Now, this was a randomized study of 400 students who were all given the same series of tests of cognitive performance. Here's where it gets interesting. Following the first and easiest of this series of tests, half the students were praised for their good work by saying, you must have worked hard. And half the students were praised for their success on these early easy tests by saying, you must be smart. That's the only difference in this randomized study. Here's what they found. The group of students who were praised for working hard were 3 times more likely to want to engage in subsequent tests that were more difficult than the one they had just taken. In fact, 92% of the students who were praised for working hard wanted to do more difficult things. Only 33% of the students who were praised for being smart wanted to do more difficult things. Secondly, when all of the students were retested using a test that was the same level of difficulty as that first easy test that they took, the group that was praised for working hard increased their performance on essentially the same test by 30%. But the group that was praised for being smart decreased their performance by 20%. So apparently, it really does make a difference in how we praise our kids in terms of their ability to develop that growth mindset that predicts so many of those positive life outcomes that I mentioned earlier. Strategy number 3, encourage their life outside the classroom. Encourage their social life. Encourage their extracurricular life. Recently, Frank Bruni in the New York Times looked at a phenomenon on college campus that he called the new campus scourge. If I was there in person, I'd be sampling all of you, asking you for what you think the new campus scourge might be. So you might have your own perspectives on that. But according to Frank Bruni, the new campus scourge is loneliness. Bruni reported on a survey of nearly 28,000 students on 51 college campuses in the United States, conducted by the American College Health Association, and found that more than 60% of our college student respondents said that they had felt, quote, very lonely, close quote, in the previous 12 months. And 30% said that they had felt that way in just the past 2 weeks. The thing that's kind of amazing about that is that this is the most social time in a college student's life. They walk to class together, they eat together, they live together, they study together. And yet we have a near epidemic of loneliness in these very social college settings. So we know now that feeling connected to the people around us is just absolutely critical for our well-being, right? It's why we really have to look at how do we help students to build stronger connections with one another while they're in college. In fact, we know that relationship support and the experience of social belonging on college campuses predicts 2 things that I'm pretty sure are of interest to all of us as parents. Those conditions promote happiness and predict good grades. So life outside the classroom is where we get those connections made socially, right? That help them to feel their best and do their best work. And life outside the classroom is also where the skills and the competencies get developed that matter most to a healthy, happy, successful life after college. Now, if you're not convinced yet, I want to share with you what employers tell us at the University of Virginia that they are most looking for in 4th year UVA student college resumes. There they are. Take a look. But let me do a little bit of sorting here for a second. The ones that just popped in orange, right? What would you say those have in common? Just look them over. Some of you might be thinking, oh, well, they're EQ, emotional competency, social competency variables, or non-cognitive variables, pick your term. Some people might call them soft skills. Well, let me tell you, there's nothing soft about these skills. These are the hardcore requirements for success after college. And these things get developed for the most part outside the classroom. So you can help us in developing these critical competencies in your students by encouraging them to lead an active, busy life outside of the classroom. Now, if any of these ideas so far sound like they might be of interest to some of your students, I would encourage you to tell them about a class that I teach in the fall and the spring semesters called The Resilient Student: Transition, Thriving, and Leadership. In short, it's a course on how to successfully overcome setbacks and challenges and disappointments. You see, college students are kind of fed this myth that the undergraduate years are just packed with frivolity and fun and flipping frisbees on the lawn. And while there's certainly, thankfully, some truth in that, college is really an extended in-between phase when students are kind of sandwiched between what doesn't work or what doesn't fit for them so well at home anymore and what hasn't quite yet formed for them in their adult life. College is more often an uncomfortable and demanding time emotionally. So LPPL 2100, the Resilient Student, is designed to help them establish 12 scientifically supported competencies of resilience, skills that help them bounce back from setbacks and disappointments and support the development of their emotional resilience and well-being. So we work on things like developing a growth mindset, which we just mentioned, strengthening optimism and gratitude mindsets. We talk about how to help them form new relationships with people they don't know very well and how to form stronger relationships with people that are already in their life. We talk about the power of mindfulness and help them to develop mindful-based practices. We help them to look at their self-concept. What do they believe about themselves? What's accurate and what's toxic? And to kind of rebuild a self-understanding that gives them the best chance of being a confident, successful adult. So the centerpiece of the class is a project in which they do something for 10 weeks that makes them uncomfortable, that they consider to be difficult and hard. And then they reflect on what that's teaching them about themselves. Most importantly, our students in their course evaluations almost invariably tell us that the most valuable part of the course for them is the time they spend in small communities as part of the course, in groups of 15 students for 75 minutes a week, where they go deeper with the content and they really form the kind of connections and relationships and friendships that go with them long after the class is over. So if you want access to that flyer, you can grab one in the lobby, or you can shoot this QR code if that's more your thing and share it with your student. Would love to see them in the class this fall or in the future. Just know that your students can register for up to 12 credits while they're here on grounds for this visit. And then they can register for more than 12 credits starting on August 5th. So if they register this week, that's great. Would love to see them in it, and they'll be sure to get a seat that way. But if they don't register for the class this week, they could add it starting on August 5th. Back to our strategies. Anybody remember the song Hold On Loosely, 38 Special? If you do, then you're at least as old as I am. Congratulations. Listen, don't assume that your students are ready to become the CEOs of their lives. They're still going to need you during these upcoming college years. They'll need you to help them navigate the many challenges of college life and young adulthood. But don't overmanage them either. There's some really interesting research being done right here at the University of Virginia that looks at the longitudinal trajectory of students who feel like they've been overmanaged as kids, as younger adults. And what we're finding is this: students who are overmanaged by their parents are unintentionally, lovingly and unintentionally put at risk for some relatively compromising life outcomes. We know that students who feel overmanaged by their parents are more likely to be less well liked by their peers. They're at risk for long-term romantic problems in the future, and they're at risk for lower levels of educational attainment. You see, the whole point of this time of a student's life is for them to separate and individuate. And that means for us as parents, striking a balance of holding on and letting go, and holding on and letting go. But if you had to choose to err on one side or the other, err on the side of letting go. It's too critical of a time for them developmentally to hold on too tightly or too loosely. So let's talk about what that balance looks like. First, you may have noticed that your students' brains are overdeveloped in their emotional centers and underdeveloped in their rational brain centers. Now, maybe you noticed the implication of that even at breakfast this morning with some intense emotion or some irritability. We also know that an overdeveloped emotional brain is consistent with some risk-taking behaviors and some impulsivity. So those are the things that we need to be noticing as evidence that they're kind of living with a compromised brain for a little while. What's that mean for us? Well, it means that at times they will still need you to help coach them a little bit, to provide some of that sage advice. Those things actually help a college student brain to develop more connections in the prefrontal cortex and help it to catch up with the overdeveloped emotional brain center. But we only want to be doing that when they're asking us. You see, when we do too much of that, right, we actually get in the way of them forming those same connections, that they have to be experimenting with their independence and their own problem solving and their own ideas for how to get through difficult times. So that's the holding on part. You know, some coaching, some light advising when they ask for it, that's not going to harm anything. It might even do some good. But what about the loosely part? The loosely part might be where some well-intentioned and loving parents among us are unintentionally making it harder for their children to develop resilience. Loosely is hard. And it might help to acknowledge that this whole transition right now is bittersweet. You might remember that song from Big Head Todd and the Monsters in the early 90s. As the song goes, it's a bittersweet surrender. I encourage you to play that song as you drive home from this orientation. It'll probably make you cry, and that would be okay. Sadness and anxiety and grief are normal at this time of life in the development of us as parents. But please just do your best not to confuse your need to take care of them with your anxiety and your own grief process. Give them space to struggle. That means managing the frequency of your contact with them. And unless they are truly in a crisis, right, daily contact is too much. And yes, texting counts. Now, this is the point in the talk a couple of years ago where I audibly heard a woman in the audience down there front row on my left do this. Oh, I guess I shouldn't have bought the second house in Charlottesville. And I immediately didn't know whether to love her for being so transparent and authentic or to resent her for being able to afford a second house in Charlottesville. Next, don't do anything for them that they can do for themselves. It's time to stop taking care of them. And it's time to start only being a good listener and offering infrequent advice, and only when they ask for it. Otherwise, you will be unintentionally depriving them of the neurological processes that will help make them more resilient, more independent, more successful, and more anti-fragile. Loosely is how we get those connections formed. So, in summary, if you can give them permission to struggle, help them to see the value in discomfort in the coming years. Help them to nurture a growth mindset. Strongly encourage their extracurricular and their social life outside the classroom. And hold on, but hold on loosely. Then we think that you'll be doing all that you can to foster emotional resilience in your first-year student and help make UVA the transformational experience that we all so much want it to be for them. I have business cards out in the lobby. If you want to grab one of those on your way out, I'm happy to follow up with you. Feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for our time today, and I'll hand it back over to our in-person moderators.
Okay, isn't that guy great? He is a personal friend of mine as well, and I'm lucky enough to count him that way. Tab, though, has overestimated my responsibility. She said I also taught the course. Then when he was describing the 12 to 15 size community, that was the group that I oversaw, was one of those. And I did that a few different times. Before I came over here today, I thought I'm going to look back at my folder because it's been a few years since I was involved in the course. And I open it up, and the first page is a message from Tim saying, let's first acknowledge our disappointment with what's happening. And I thought, what is that? And I look up at the top, and it was March 2020. We were all in the midst of trying to be resilient, and here we are in COVID. So yes, we had to acknowledge a lot of disappointment in that time. So if we could, though, with the house lights, I want to give you a chance to ask some questions. And before you do, I also want to confess that Tim is the expert, and I am not, although I have been leading those groups a few different times, and I am the parent of 4 children. And so I have gone through some of this as you are going through it too. I have 2 that have graduated college, 1 who's a rising second year, and my youngest who is going into JMU this fall. And I will tell you a story of my overparenting so we can start on a good foot, which was when COVID was going on, and my youngest was really struggling in her academic work. The process of being online was getting to her. I know some people thrived, she wasn't one of them. And the grades kept going down, and I kept hammering, you've got to get this done, you've got to get this done. And finally she was able to articulate to me, Dad, I will do better if you leave me alone. Yeah. That's exactly my response too. It was against everything that I thought I needed to do to be caring for her, to be an involved parent, all the messages I'd gotten from schools all along the way. But there wasn't another choice at that point either, because her grades had kept falling and she was now getting close to failing in classes. And so her mother and I talked and decided we've just got to trust that she's going to be able to do what she says she's going to do. And she finished that semester with all A's and 1 B. At the time she told me that, she was at 4 C's and an F. So we let go, and that was a few years ago, and she's just entering college now. Overparenting did not work for me. And what that does, though, it also makes me excited about college for her. I know that she's going to be capable of doing well because we stopped bothering her as parents. So if I can answer any of your questions, I will do my best to answer. What have you got for me? Yes, and we have microphones. Where our orientation leaders have microphones they're going to be bringing to you. They're up there, and we got a hand down here for somebody. And I know I'll be able to hear you. We got somebody down here in the front row. So can you get a microphone down so we can hear orientation leaders?
The name of the guy who was in the video.
Oh, right there. Go ahead. Go ahead. If you can repeat the question for everyone.
I just wanted to know the name of the man in the video.
His name is Professor Tim Davis. I'm sorry to insist on it. It's just that we have some people who can't hear very well, and so I wanted to make sure we got that. Professor Tim Davis. Yes. Thank you.
I have a question up here. Will you make the PowerPoint and video available so that we can show our partners who weren't able to come?
Tim will. Email Tim, and he's going to get that to you.
Thank you.
I also, if you heard my title, I'm Associate Director for Parent and Family Programs. I'm also going to invite Tim to come to an evening seminar so that maybe we can have a Q&A as a follow-up to this conversation as well, and have you all participate. And he has agreed in theory to participate in that, so we'll get that scheduled. And so if you go to the Family Hub that we've talked about in other places, that's our parent communication portal, then we'll be able to see the schedule for when we have that set up. Good question, thank you. So email the professor, and there's going to be handouts outside, as he said, his cards, and a handout for the class. What other questions do we have? You have a person over here? We can get a microphone over here. Ethan's running. And if you can raise your hand for the next microphone, that's also helpful. Yeah.
Hi, does that class fulfill any requirements for graduation?
Does it fulfill requirements for I think it would for Baton, but it will depend upon your major. Of course, it's a credit-bearing class, and so it can always fill an elective. But in terms of your major, of course, it'll depend on what your major is. Yes, sir.
Did they make a pitch for this class to the kids earlier today?
I don't think that they have. Nope. Tab's shaking her head.
I thought it was
no.
odd that he told us to go tell our kid to take it.
That's right. So this is the part of, yeah. It is an irony, isn't it? That's what. I'm going to give Tim Davis a hassle about that. Yeah. Yeah, Tim, you told them to stop bothering them, and then you tell them, but in this one instance for me, you should bother them. Love it. I love it. That's great. That's great. Well said. Any other questions out there? Sometimes we get the question of, is this better as a first year or a fourth year? And you can take it all 4 years. And when I was leading groups, there were people in all different years involved in the same group of 12 to 15. And I say we had a group of 12, 15. The larger class is about 150 that Tim will address. And then in the smaller groups, we have the 12 to 15. It's almost like a lab a couple of times a week. And so, so you can take it at any time. He recommends that the first year is the best, but you can take it any time and get a lot out of it. When I had fourth years in it, they said it was the best course they had at UVA. So, for what it's worth. Other questions? Okay, there's a microphone right behind you.
How does the university ensure that the professors are grading assignments or papers in a timely manner and giving feedback? Does the university track it?
Does the university track the pressures caused by the grading process? Is that your?
No. Does the university track the professors to ensure that the professors are grading the assignments and giving the feedback back to the students in a timely manner, not waiting until the end of the semester to give the graded assignments back?
And you mean in all classes?
Yeah, in general.
Okay, making sure that feedback is timely, and does the university track that? There is no one tracking system to make sure professors are grading in a timely manner. It certainly is encouraged, and students have brought that back to the attention of a professor, saying this is important to me, and I would encourage your student to do that as well. to say, I need to get this back. I encouraged my own daughter to do that. She was struggling in a class here. She took French, and this particular instructor said that if you didn't get an 85 in the class, then you got 0 points on that assignment. So an 84 or below was 0. And I said, and this was about 4 weeks into class, and I said, well, how many points do you think you have right now? And she said 0. And so she was struggling with that and also not knowing some of the grades that had yet to come in, which was really frustrating for her. And so the first step that anytime that a student struggles with situations like that is to talk to the professor directly. And so we would encourage, no matter who a student goes to, they will say, well, what did the professor say? And so a student will need to go to the professor and say, I'm having a hard time with, in this case for my daughter, it was the grading system, but also with not getting my papers back in a timely way so that I can plan my semester appropriately and so I can put in the appropriate amount of effort. And the professor was responsive to some of that and not as responsive in a way that my daughter was comfortable with. And I said, the next step is to go to the chair. So she did go to the chair, and there was some action taken to remedy this situation. So there's always a process for that, but not necessarily a tracking. I wouldn't say that. Does that answer your question? Okay. What else? Any other questions out there? Here's your microphone.
Hi, I'm the mother also of 2 rising second years, and they both took a calculus section last year. One was taught in a growth mindset, and one was not. And I was curious, is that something the university is experimenting with in different classes, or was that particular part of like an ed school study or something?
Oh, I don't know. That's news to me. One class, that would be an interesting study, but no, I have not heard about that. If that's what's happening, that's news to me. Have you heard anything about that? No? None of my support staff back here know either. Okay. Well, I guess that we're going to wrap it up. I really appreciate being able to spend time with you today, and I will pass along all of your laughter and applause to Professor Davis, and a little bit of criticism. He needs some growth. That's fair. Hey, he needs to grow, right? Thank you all. Nice job.